Welcome to another episode of Mexican in the Kitchen. This time I'm starting by doing something you've probably seen me do before. I have 1.5 cups of pinto beans. These are the two varieties I usually have at home. I have these black beans and the pinto beans. You can use them for different things. They have a slight different flavor, but you can use whatever variety of beans you prefer. They sell these dry and you could start cooking them right away, but it will take quite a long time. So in order to reduce this time, I'm going to add some water in here. I have them in a bowl I usually use for this. I usually leave them overnight. The ideal time is at least 4 hours and up to 12. I will also add half a teaspoon of baking soda. This is supposed to help the beans soften a bit quicker. Some people skip the baking soda and they just add a couple tablespoons of salt. But anyway, we are going to mix everything and leave them here overnight. This is how my beans are looking the next day. As you can see, there's a lot of the color in the water. They have also grown quite a bit. They have hydrated, so this will cook way faster now. This water has some of the dirt the beans might have. It has the baking soda, and we're going to throw this away. I'm using a strainer. I think it makes the process way easier. Once we have them in the strainer, we can let the tap water run through them for a while, move them around, and make sure you rinse them nicely. I know some people might think cooking beans from scratch is a bit too much trouble. It might be a bit of a waste of time. I do understand this way of thinking, and if you wanted to use some shortcuts, you could buy some pre-cooked beans. I know that here in Finland you can buy them out of a can, for example, or a Tetra Pak package. Those might be fine if you're in a hurry, but doing them from scratch allows you to season them exactly as you want, and the flavor, of course, is going to be always better. Once I'm done rinsing my beans, I can take them to the stove. Here I have a pot with about 2 liters of water. This pot is on an 8 out of 9 on the stove, so it's high fire, and I'm going to wait for the water to start boiling. At this point, I'm not going to add any seasoning. I just want to cook my beans until they're soft. If you have an instant pot, this can be way quicker. I'll leave a link in the description to some of my videos where I use a pressure cooker for beans. My beans have been boiling now for about 10 minutes, and as you can see, there's quite some foam. I'm just going to use a spoon to remove it, and then I'm going to cover my pot and turn the fire down to a 5 out of 9 on the stove, so medium fire. How long do we need to cook the beans? It depends on many factors: how old the beans are, how well hydrated they are, how powerful your stove is. I will check them about 45 minutes in, and then keep checking them every 10 minutes. One way of testing if the beans are ready is taking a tiny spoon, pressing one of them, trying to smash it. If it gets smashed quite easily, they are soft, then it's probably ready. The best way, of course, is maybe take 1 or 2 and taste them. Right now the flavor will be quite plain, but we'll get to the seasoning part later. These have been on the stove for an hour and they are ready now. Right now I'm going to split the beans from the water we cooked them in, and I'm going to strain them because it's the easiest way, but make sure to keep the water because we will use it later. Here I have a medium-sized onion. I'm going to cut it. You can cut it however you like. You can dice it if you want. Personally, I'm going to cut it into strips because we don't need to be too precise. Once we're done cutting it, we can set it aside and continue. I will also add 1 tomato. I'm going to also cut it quite roughly. You don't have to be too precise. Just dice it and we can set it aside and continue. Finally, I have 5 garlic cloves. I'm going to slice them and set them aside. Here I have the same pot I used to boil the beans. I just gave it a quick rinse. I put it on the stove. It's on a 5 or 6 out of 9, so medium-high fire. I'm going to add a splash of canola oil. Once I have added the oil, I'm going to start by adding the onion and garlic. Here we will keep an eye on them. We'll keep stirring, make sure nothing gets stuck to the pot, nothing burns. We want to cook them here for a few minutes until the onion starts turning translucent. After a few minutes, our onion starts changing color. You can tell there's also some liquid coming out of it. Things look a bit more moist. We're adding now the tomato. We're going to mix everything. You'll see some steam coming out. Tomato will start to let a lot of the juice out. If you wanted to use some dried chilies, I would do it at this point. For example, I have this pasilla here. I would just cut it open, remove the seeds and throw it in here. Personally, I would use pasilla chili with black beans, and when I'm using pinto beans, then I like adding the tomato, which is also optional, and some of these chipotles adobados. These chipotles are not usually super spicy, but they are nicely seasoned. They have this adobo sauce, and they will drop quite some flavor into any dish where you add them. These are usually not too spicy. I would usually add 1 or 2 chipotles. If you think they are too spicy, you can add maybe just some of the sauce and the onions it has. If you live in Finland, you might find this salsa chipotle, which doesn't have the chipotles. It's just a sauce, and you can use a couple spoons of this. If you have been following my recipes, you already know this garlic, tomato, onion base is quite traditional for many dishes. When you add the chipotle and you're cooking these on the fire, your kitchen will already start smelling quite nice. As you can see, we're also getting quite some color now. So I'm going to keep these here for a couple minutes, keep stirring from time to time, make sure it doesn't get stuck or burn. And after a couple minutes, we can add our beans. At this point, this is how my base looks. And I'm going to go get the beans we strained before and add them into my pot. Before we start seasoning, we want to make sure we mix everything nicely. We want all of those flavors from our base to mix with the beans. At this point, I'm going to start seasoning, and I'm going to start by adding some black pepper. I will also add some salt. We're keeping these quite simple. At this point, you can add any seasoning you prefer. I'm going to add some epazote. I have dried epazote. You might find it as Mexican tea as well. My mom used to use these quite a lot, and I like the flavor. If you find it fresh, it's even better. During summer, when my avocado plant has some nicer leaves and big leaves, and many of them, I might also take one of those leaves and throw it in there. At this point, I'm keeping it quite simple: salt, pepper, epazote. But if you want to add anything else, you can play with those and of course change this recipe to match whatever you usually use for beans. Now that we have seasoned our beans, I'm going to use some of the water we set aside, and I'm going to throw it in here. I don't usually measure how much water I add. I usually just calculate by eye, and it doesn't really matter how much water you add. It's completely up to you. It depends on how thick or how runny you want this soup to be. Personally, I just add water until it covers the beans, and then later, if I think that's too much water, I'll just reduce it for a while on the stove. Right now, I will leave these on the stove. I'm going to let it be there for 5-10 minutes, just make sure all the flavors come together nicely. This is my soup after 10 minutes. It seems the ingredients are coming together nicer, and as you can see, it has a nicer color. Everything is ready. I'm going to set it away from the fire, let it cool down for a bit, set it aside, let it rest, and we can come back to it later. While I'm waiting for my soup to cool down, I'm going to cut these tortillas in half. Then I will cut them again in half. This is the kind of cut you would usually make when you're making tortilla chips or you're preparing some chilaquiles. We are going to use these tortillas as garnish for our dish, and this will bring the crunchy element to our soup. Once I have cut them into fourths, I'm going to take my knife. I'm going to use it as a guide to make sure they are even, and then I'm going to cut them into tiny strips. How thin or thick you make them is completely up to you, but I think when you cut them into thin strips, they turn quite crunchy and they look very pretty on your plate. For these, we're using corn tortillas because that's the tortilla that will get crispy, and it will also last longer when you soak it in some liquid. Here I have a pot with canola oil. It's already hot. It's on a 6 out of 9, so medium high fire. I'm going to throw my tortilla strips in there, and I'm going to keep stirring, keep an eye on them, make sure they don't burn. These tortilla strips will slowly start changing color. First, you will notice they start getting a bit hard. If you take them out too early, they might be chewy, but slowly you will notice how they start becoming darker. You don't want to get them to be too dark because otherwise they might get bitter. Just keep an eye on them, keep stirring. You will notice how they start sounding different, they start looking different, they start getting a bit more stiff, and eventually they will become crispy and we can take them out. When I'm taking them out, I'm going to place them on a plate with some kitchen paper just to absorb the excess oil, and I'm going to set them aside because we're using these later. Once the beans have cooled down a bit, I'm going to throw them into my blender and we can blend everything together. If you have an immersion blender, you can probably do this on the pot. It's going to be way easier. How long you need to blend this depends on your blender. Personally, I had this on for 1 minute and that was enough. Just make sure you don't have any chunks and that will be good enough. At this point, the soup is ready, so I'm going to bring it back to the pot. I'm going to turn the fire on because I think I used a bit too much water. I would like to reduce this for a bit, so I'll just boil it for a while just so it thickens. This is also a good time for you to taste your soup, add more salt or pepper if needed, or whatever seasoning you prefer. After a while, my soup thickened and is ready for plating. For serving this soup, I'm going to serve it as I remember my mom serving it sometimes. I'm going to add some creme fraiche or sour cream, whatever you prefer. I'm going to add a few slices of avocado because beans and avocado is just a perfect combination. I will sprinkle some cheese on top. I would usually use queso fresco. In Finland I cannot find it, so I'm going to use some feta style cheese. Finally, I'm going to add some of those crispy tortilla strips I made. These will make it crispy, and also the corn flavor of the tortilla goes really nicely with beans. This is how I make this bean soup. I cannot really show you here because, it'll make a mess, but this is very nice. I really like it. I think it's one of those that is very easy, very simple. You can cook some beans and then just make these very quickly, as long as you just plan ahead a bit, let them soak overnight. This is something I really like. It has a lot of different extras you can add to the plate. You can add some chorizo, for example. You can add some shred chicken, and you can add also all other kind of protein if you want. Then you have the avocado, gives a lot of the creaminess, like the very fresh. You have the crunchiness of the tortillas. You could also use croutons, maybe would be easier if you don't want to make some fried tortillas, or you can also put them, for example, on the air fryer. They also get crunchy. It's up to you. There's a lot of variations. I used some chipotle. As I showed you, you can use maybe some pasilla. You can even add some ancho, guajillo, play with it, play with the different chilies. You will get different kind of flavors. And that's why I like these, because you can just use the base recipe and then just add and make your own variation. Try different textures even. You can make it more creamy. You can make it more liquid. Then it's just one of those that you can make so many different variations with the same recipe. And you won't get bored of it because, you always add an extra touch, or extra twist here and there, and then you have different dishes for the week. So I hope you try at home. Press like, subscribe, activate the bell, all those kind of things, and see you in the next one.